It's the DJ Ekin podcast. Of course, I am DJ Ekin. And get this before we even get started, because for those who happen to catch us on video and that sort of thing, she was supposed to be here, and so shouts out to Brittany, who's not here, of course. So I don't want anybody to think that suddenly, like, I finally got all the way fed up with Brittany, or Brittany finally got all the way fed up with me, and she decided that she didn't want to do, because Brittany and I we didn't have some issues, but when we made a promo, Brittany made it sound like we had some issues with my name being a little bit bigger than hers, and she agreed to all of that. That's what's really so. That's a whole nother story. But welcome everybody that rocks with us to the DJ Aiken podcast. And here's the thing: before I introduce you, I don't want to hold you there long, like just looking at the camera. There are like so many things in the news cycle right now, right? They're like, and Brittany and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. I was like, Brittany, it won't be long before Black Lives Matter. It'll be like seventh thing in the news cycle. And so today, right, when I thought about recording, there's the Jeffrey Epstein madam that has gotten arrested. We still got Cam Newton getting picked up by the Patriots in the news. Of course, probably 3 or 4 more videos have dropped on Instagram of somebody pulling a gun where they shouldn't, or somebody getting mistreated or something like that. And so when I look at the news, I'm just like, here we go. Just like I said, it's coming. But then I got a text from you, or one in my comments. And for everybody who doesn't know you, let me introduce you right now. This is probably, and I'm not just saying it because you're looking at me, I'll tell you this all the time.
You do.
This is probably one of my most favorite people in the entire world, Toni Howard Lowe. And let me tell you why you're my most favorite person before I even get into your credentials. Okay. Because ever since I've met you, you have been like that sister to me who, it don't matter how high I think I am, it don't matter how many props I might have just got, you will bring me right to the earth and be like, well, let's talk about this. And then not that it's always a bad conversation. It'd be things that, you have those people that say, somebody that I'll say what you need to hear, not always what you want to hear. That has always been you, and that has always been our relationship. And I don't mean it like you just tell me about myself, like in a bad way. I mean, it's just always been real dope conversations. And I love all the things that you've accomplished. And I love how, like, your whole family and everything you got going on. So in the continuance of this conversation, I mean, in the news cycle, when I thought about it and I got the text from you, I was in this place. Oh, and another thing that's going on in the news, because I've gotten this text like 5 times today, is the Franklin Manor story has evolved. And everyone who knows about anything Franklin Manor, if you follow us here at the DJ Aiken podcast, the Franklin Manor guy is getting sued by 3 women here in Tampa that are bringing lawsuit against him for some sexual allegations. So the news cycle is just moving. And I tell you all the time, whatever can get a bunch of hits on Instagram or these social media things, it's suddenly going to take over. But to me, I still don't think that we've settled how much Black lives need to matter.
Yeah.
And so before we get deeper into this conversation, again, Miss Toni Howard Lowe, and I'm just glad that you're on the podcast. So can you do me a favor? Can you just give them a little bit about what you actually do? Because I think a lot of people are going to want to hear this conversation, not only because of the whole, you are the epitome of what I call Black girls rock, but what you do in corporate America too. I think a lot of people can get real insight from this conversation. So can you give us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah. So thank you for having me. And big up to Britt for letting me steal her little shine for today. But I have been on this journey for a really long time before it became popular to do, right? So I started my career traditionally in what most people know as like HR, human resources. But over the last 7 to 8 years, I've been highly focused on diversity and inclusion as a global leader. And I've worked for some of the top companies, building out integrated strategy around this work, and particularly around like equity and inclusion and systemic racism, and how we kind of dismantle that within the corporate setting. Right. So on top of that, my moniker is, the corporate T, and my goal has always been to kind of bridge the gap for underrepresented groups as it relates to your corporate journey. So I'm kind of all things career girl, career goals, advice and insights have been pretty much featured everywhere. I won't get into that. Y'all can go to my site and visit. But at the end of the day, who am I? Really, so much about me is kind of rooted in being a social justice advocate within the workplace or the corporate structure, which is different because activism comes in different places. But for me, I've sort of always kind of considered myself like the Harriet Tubman of the corporate workforce. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like I'm trying to take everybody with me, right? And so that is who I am.
Right. And it's just such a dope thing, and it's funny for me and how me and you got close because I kind of play the corporate space but don't play the corporate because I've kind
Yeah.
of always had my own thing going on, and then in this radio journey I kind of got into some corporate spaces, and I kind of feel like you in a lot of ways where in a lot of situations I've been in, I've been the first one in the door to take a lot of hits when people don't even understand some of these meetings that we're in or some of the
Yeah.
things that we're fighting for. Okay, so as it relates to Black Lives Matter, one of the things that Brittany and I were talking about last week, of course, was
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I'm so glad that you're here for this conversation, is how it seems like right now, everybody, the hashtags are singing Black Lives Matter. Corporate folks are, like
Yeah.
there's a bunch of money being thrown. There's
Yeah.
certain teams inside now that are the Black
Mm-hmm.
Lives Matters team. And one of the things that really got me, and I've expressed this, without just calling direct names, because I'm not, like I'm not on the whole cancel train all the time, but
Yeah.
like I really have literally been in places, and I've talked to you about this, where I've been in places where I can count that there's 7 to 10 Black people, African American, however you want to label it, in the building, right? And Black History Month comes, and I don't even see a sticker.
Yeah.
I don't even see a sticker. And now it's like, oh my God, because it's the biggest movement going. I'm watching from the top to the bottom. Everybody's using the hashtag. And my biggest thing with that was Black Lives Matter. Even if you want to go into just where we are with the culture right now, even we just go back to even before my time. Let's go Rodney King. That's 91.
Yeah.
And the cycle has not, it's not really changed, not a lot from where
Yeah.
me and you stand. So when you on that inside, right, where you are, what does that look like a lot to you when you see suddenly these teams are being,
Yeah.
suddenly we got just a social justice team, and you looking like, I've watched you step over people and go around people for the longest time that don't even get an interview, don't even get
Yeah.
consideration.
It's interesting, right? Because literally George Floyd was murdered. It's maybe been 4 weeks, give or take.
Right.
And overnight, you're like, what happened 4 weeks ago? Here's what you were telling me. Now, 4 weeks later, here we are, and there's this race to allyship, right? Because nobody really wants to be outed now that the curtain of injustice is sort of kind of pulled back, you know?
Right.
And what we call this in the D&I world is performative activism. And basically, I call it slacktivism, right? Which is basically you have these broad gestures, that you're leaning into your external stakeholders. You're saying, Black lives do matter, and you're doing, but everything behind closed doors and inside your internal organizations and how you move and what you do is still very rooted in systemic racism. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so if you're treating your internal Black employees one way, but then you're making open statements another way, right?
Right.
So when you were discussing this last week?
Last week's
And,
episode. Yes.
and you were talking about this. I was like, wait. I raised my hand. I got something to say about this because it was so spot on in that you are calling out exactly like money is not enough, right? And also
Right.
here, let me say this too, because not only have I done, D&I, but one of the things that Ekin and I worked on was his I Care About Me Foundation, and I have a really strong background in corporate social responsibility. And so when it comes to the nonprofit work, what people have to also understand is like giving an HBCU $5 million, great, noble gesture, right? But
Right.
some of these foundations within corporate companies have multi-million dollar budgets. So allocating $5 million is a minimum. Okay, A, right?
Right.
And it's a tax write-off, B. And then if you create a pipeline of, Black talent at HBCUs to come into your corporate organization, but only to be treated and not have the conditions to succeed, be treated poorly and not have the conditions to succeed, then we're still in the same place, right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, if we're not going to talk about what you're going to fix internally in your organizations and dismantling systemic racist policy practices, behaviors, then I don't really care what dollar amount you're going to give. Great. But here's the thing, 4 weeks ago, you weren't giving that. Why? Let's talk about that. Let's have that question, right? Because you had $5 million to give 4 weeks ago. What changed, right? And so there's this whole like pouring out. And so again, you guys can Google it, but performative activism is really just when we need to stay awake. We need to stay woke around the fact that all of these noble things, we're reposting it, we're resharing it, and we're like, oh, look what this XY, they put out, this, they set up these movies of all Black people when I log in. How dope, how cool. Because right now, Black Lives Matter is provocative, right? And nobody wants to be seen as the organization that's not participating in this conversation. But at the end of the day, show me them org charts, though.
Right. And is that and I'm not sure if you know much about this, or you may. It's a big news thing right now that Adidas is going through, I guess, because Adidas is Adidas. I guess what's going on with their organization is all of a sudden a bunch of their Black employees was like, yo, like the same thing you were saying. It's like, okay, you talking this game, but inside of here, this is what's happening to us. Yeah. And I think now, like one of their big HR people, she just stepped down or whatever. Yeah. And is this pretty much like the standard? Am I just because to me it honestly, like, okay, let's look at radio. And again, I'm only telling you things that I actually see and I know. That's what I try to do. Like here, I don't, or either I'll ask a question of someone who I feel like you as an authority on it, right? Yeah. In radio, one of the things that we found out was, especially with the hip hop culture, like I would look at a hip hop station, right? Yeah. And it seemed like it was no problem with putting someone who was of another nationality on a hip hop station, letting them be the program director, letting him run the station. But when it came to the pop stations or whatever, it was hard for us to even get a look over there. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was hard for us to even get a look over there. And, and they're talking about it in the industry now where it's like, okay, they're talking about getting rid of maybe the urban department. And then I saw another article, right? And keep me on track here, right? One of the guys was talking about how if you look at the music, right, maybe you need to dismantle the pop department too, because how come when Trey Songz or Jeremiah puts out a record, right, it's considered urban, so the budgets are less, you're not getting the same support. But if Bieber puts out a record or Ariana Grande, it's immediately considered a pop record. Yeah. And Black people wrote it and produced it.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, you still have the same, if you take this really is the exact same model, even on the corporate side, right? And I'm gonna be 100% transparent. For as long as I've been doing this work, if I went to a corporate executive and said, hey, I want to do something exclusively for Black women, it would be like I said a cuss word. Like, are you kidding me? But if I said I want to do something for the LGBTQ community, or I want to do something for women, right? Which could be largely like a women's organization within a corporate structure, but largely more white audience, fine, right? No matter what I was asking for, I could get money for any segment. But if I said I wanted to specifically do something just for Black women,
right,
it was a problem, right?
Wow.
And even though every day we're sitting at the table having a conversation about the pipeline and the lack of Black talent and what we want to do, so it's like we're not going to throw real money at a situation, but we're going to continue to talk about it and what we're going to do and all these good faith efforts. So it's the same thing even on the corporate side, right? And all of it really has to do with just overall implicit bias and how structurally we have so much. It's there. I don't even know how to fix it, to be honest with you. Like, even as a practitioner, it is so deeply rooted in the existence of like U.S. history. Like, when people ask me, well, how do we fix it? Right? It's just like, like it's so deep. Right. It literally starts with the work has to start as a commitment by individual people who are benefiting within a system of systemic racism, if that makes sense. Like, you got to do the work for yourself, right? And so what we try to do is throw dollars at it. We're like, oh, we're gonna do some cool initiative that's provocative, and quiet as it's kept, we have. Whether it's on the corporate side, whether it's in media, whether it's in entertainment, the Black community has always been cool to co-op, right? Like, everybody wants, They love our energy. They love our style. So all those things have always been cool and especially if you work for a corporate company that's more of a consumer brand,
Right.
beverage or alcohol or all of it's been cool. But then when you look at the dollars and how they're investing their money, whether that's through supplier diversity, the vendors they're hiring, how they partner, we could get into such a deep conversation, even when you think about influencers now, right? And
Right.
how Black influencers are paid versus white influencers. It is so deep
Right.
that, what I think the biggest thing that I want people to take away is your initial point, which was the money is not good enough,
Right.
right? And to be careful when someone says, like, I'm going to give $100 million, right? And I'm going to give 70 of it to, the National Negro College Fund, and I'm going to give to these two HBCUs, right? What does that mean, though? How is
That's my
that money
question.
going to be utilized? How is that going to make it better? What are you going to do internally for your organization? We've got to start forcing a stricter report card around what you're going to do differently around your behaviors,
Right.
not just your dollars.
Can we dive a little bit into the diversity and inclusion conversation a little bit? Because like I don't definitely not even close to knowing what you know, and I think the people that rock with us, I want them to hear more about it. Because one of the things that I do keep saying, and again, if you know me, I move around the social media space a lot, so I'll see this announcement, I'll see that announcement. And yesterday, I think I was on Twitter, or it could have been the day before, and a young lady tweeted. She goes, let's stop acting like the only position that we can get now is the diversity
Diversity
and
and inclusion.
inclusion director or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And can you first of all, before we
Oh,
go into
yeah.
that conversation, can we talk about a little bit what is the diversity and inclusion position supposed to be? What are they supposed to do now that there's suddenly all these positions are
Yeah.
being announced in these companies?
If someone put out a meme and you guys can probably find it, but it listed some of the top Fortune 100 companies in tech and banking and everywhere. And it looked at their organizational structure, and everywhere you saw a Black C-suite leader, it was basically a diversity and inclusion role, right? And I will say, I don't know what the future state of being a practitioner. I don't know what the future will bring, right? I
Right.
do think some of the goodness that came out of all of this is us being able to be unfiltered in a way that we've never been able to be before, because
Okay.
it's been largely very political, right?
Right.
And so, I have to agree with the sentiment, even though I'm a Black, D&I leader. We do become sort of a martyr for the people, right? Like we get into these organizations and all of our people are looking at us like, Toni, what you gonna do? Like, are
Right.
you, and our hands are sort of tied in that we're not always key decision makers, although we might be influencers. But ultimately, in these roles, the idea is that we're supposed to be identifying whatever disparities that exist in the company and creating integrated strategy for the company on how we can close those gaps. So whether that's in our talent pool, or whether that's how we partner, or whether that's how we spend our dollars, the roles can be, different,
Right.
depending on, all of that. But ultimately, sometimes they can be very much a formality role, vanity roles, vanity titles, right? Where
Right.
you're a face. I can say I have someone in my C-suite that is doing this work, but they really don't have any real power, no internal resources, no teams. They're not paid as well as their operational peers. So quiet as it's kept, even for D&I leaders, some of us can still very much be oppressed too, even in a role that's a high level role.
Right. And are these roles as of late, are they just suddenly like looking in those Fortune 100 companies that you were talking about? Were those roles there before the Black Lives Matter, before the George Floyd, the
Oh
Black Lives Matter
yeah.
movement?
Oh yeah. I would say D&I roles largely have been around about 15 years
Right.
or so. These roles have existed, for years and years and years. And so these are not new. Now, are there companies who are coming to the table now saying we need to create one? Absolutely.
Right.
My phone has rang more in the last 4 weeks, more roles forwarded to me. Would I be
Oh wow.
interested than it has in the last 7 years?
Wow. But are these roles going to change anything? Do you think, in your opinion? And because I mean, one of the points you made that I'm definitely holding on to is, I feel like the same way I feel about like a lot of the money. I think the numbers are cool when they get thrown out. You know what I'm saying? And even stepping back a second and let's look in the nonprofit space, right? Since I've been in this space, it's been a lot to learn. It's been a lot to learn about how
Yeah.
they get grant money, and actually, what's funny to me is it's made me kind of create my own way of how I want to get money. Of like keeping my
Right.
hustle legal, of course, but keeping my hustle of like, yo, there's other ways to do it. These kids now are getting the message different ways. We gotta go to where we are today as well as still use some of the same principles, right? So when you look at like where they're throwing some of this money at, right? And it seemed like to me, once people are in these certain pipelines, right? They're in these roles, or they know where to get the money from.
Mm-hmm.
From your side, and like I said, you see it probably, like I said, you probably look at more charts and more things than I probably would ever look at. I'm getting into that more now because I feel like that's the only way I'm going to really be able to affect real change with these roles or with this money that's being thrown around. And maybe over the last year, even coming up to now, has it really made any real change, or are we just going to probably see maybe a year from now some real change? And this might not be a fact, but just your thoughts on where you think it's going.
Well, let me tell you this. Like, I'm a visionary. And I
Uh-huh.
remember I sat down, I won't call him out, but I sat down I pitched an idea to a very well-known CEO for, he owns a software that is very prevalent in the D&I space. And I won't say what it is. And I told him, and this was probably about 2.5 years ago, I said, if you're paying attention to what is happening, there's becoming this intersection of social justice, D&I, right, and corporate social responsibility. And I think that you should evolve your software for there to be a tool to hold everyone accountable and how they measure it internally in corporate companies, like, so to speak, a scorecard. I said this 2.5 years ago because I saw what was happening. So
Right.
let me explain to you what I think is happening, and I'm going to answer your question on whether or not this will be a formality or not. One, you have a couple things. The generational workforce is changing, right? Baby boomers got gold watches. They stayed for 40 years. They were taught like whatever we got, we should be happy for, grateful for. They were grateful to retire. But the landscape of companies is changing. And as millennials rise to leadership, people pick on millennials, but millennials are old. Millennials about to be 40 next year, right?
Right.
So when millennials are rising to leadership, their entire palette, they watch their grandparents, potential, be in the civil rights era. They watch their parents work jobs and then be laid off, and for some of the big, car companies and things like that, when we were coming out of that entire situation. And so ultimately millennials now are like, the company that I work for has to serve me. Like, this is a mutual benefit. And so as
Right.
they ascend to leadership, they're not as complacent, they're not as silent, right? So then on top of that, so keep that in mind, you have that going on here. Then you
Okay.
also have social media, right? Which you and we both went to college together. We didn't have social media, thank God, because a lot of stuff would not have had me in corporate. But now, over the last, 10 years or so, we're now watching social media become this thing that it never was before. So your
Right.
ability to find people, out people, do things is totally different, right?
Right.
So you have a whole Black Twitter, right? And when they come for you, it's
They come.
like they coming for you, right?
Right.
So now corporate companies back 20 years ago, 10 years ago, had the ability to stay silent. I know I work for a very large conservative company that was offering same-sex benefits, but would never list it because they were conservative, right? So
Ah.
they offered it, they were doing that thing, but for years, until it became provocative and pride became a bigger thing, then they start saying, oh, we do this thing. And they had been doing it for years, but they wouldn't necessarily advertise it because it kind of went against who they
Who they were. Right.
who they were, right? And so now what is happening is the world is evolving. So when you, going back to your original question, when you asked me, is this a formality or not? I think some things are going to be a formality. Just they just are. There's a lot of people who are talking, but I do think that what this is opening the door for is for certain people to get into certain roles and to come in and say, you hired me to speak my mind. You hired me to do these things. So I do also think that there is going to be an evolution, a
Okay.
revolution, right, of what will be tolerated and what won't. And you even see it with like the Me Too movement, right? Like women are like, nah, like I'm just not going to be sexually harassed
Right.
for on the job anymore. Like I'm just going to tweet it out, you write a letter, write an open letter, like it's lights out, it's canceled, like that, we're canceling you, period, right?
Right.
I think the same thing is happening for Black lives, but I think the difference between, say, sexual harassment or, kind of uh, more of a gender issue versus a racial issue is that the U.S. history around systemic racism, it is so deeply rooted in our DNA
Okay.
that I can't sit here and tell you that a year from now all of it will be fixed, right?
Right.
But I think we're headed in the right direction. But I will say, if I had to give you a number, 60% of these companies, this is performative activism. 60% of these companies are going to go back to doing what they were always doing. But I do think that there's a great deal, like about 40%, that's like, nah, we got to do something different.
Right. Let me ask you this, because you and that's what's so dope about you. When I watch how you move in these spaces, you've always had very much a cool ear too. So when you see things, and I often talk about this too, these entertainers, right? How much? Because I honestly don't like. I really don't. I think that Terry Crews has a platform, right? But what Terry Crews says, I honestly don't be putting too much stock in, because he's just a dude like me. Do you
Yeah.
think that we're putting too much stock into, like okay, let's use Terry Crews for an example, or a Candace Owens who has these followers, and they
Yeah.
talk, they say these things, and because they're black, like I don't immediately think because somebody's black that they speaking for me. I just don't.
Yeah.
Like I'm
I
sorry.
think within our culture, I understand why people are irate. Like now is not the time, right?
Right.
It's like when you go to a family outing and then that always drunk uncle, he like, come on, man, like we had
Right.
this talk, right? So I understand why people are responding that the way they are, because this is such a critical time and we want to keep people focused on what's important and not your shenanigans. But at the same time, there are certain people like Candace Owens and Terry. I personally, I don't share, I don't participate, because I want to stay on topics like Breonna Taylor. You know
Right.
what I mean? I want to make sure that we're still having the right conversations. And so for me, I don't participate in the conversations on social. I don't reshare, because that is just not important to me. And I guess, from an EQ perspective, just mature enough to know that, like, what I want my platform to solely be focused on things that matter, and
Right.
not just, to be in a provocative conversation. Do we give a lot of stocks to celebrities? I think it's yes and no, right? I think celebrities, um, I think if we're going to, quiet as it's kept, if we're going to really talk about systemic racism, I think a lot of times we think, to your point, one, Black people are very just like white people, just like Latinx, like whatever, like we're all different. We're not one, personality, right? So we're going to have the whole gamut when it comes to our personalities.
Right.
Um, and how we, and even our our set of beliefs is going to be different, right? Based on how we were raised, our upbringing and experiences. Um, but at the same time, I think that when we think about systemic racism, one of the things that we have to think about is, like, it is a full system and all of us participate in it. And so, like, when white people say, well, I'm not racist or I don't see color, it's like not about, are you racist? It's how am I racist and how am I participating in my HOA when I use my whiteness as a weapon, when I, like, how are you behaving in a system of oppression?
Right.
And let's be clear, even sometimes for Black people, when we are middle class and we're used to certain comforts, and so when you talk about celebrities, there's also a level of privilege as a celebrity and access and attention and the things that you've gotten. So all of us have to participate in laying something down in order to move the movement forward.
Right. Honestly, I feel like that sometimes too. I feel like because you know me, I ain't with a lot of the BS. Even though I know everything from the hood dudes to dudes who are like, I really feel like they strictly professional. They wear slacks to all the cookouts. You know what I'm saying? That sort of thing, right? But I did start to feel, as much as and I don't know if I can say I really avoided it. I just don't be with the BS, right? So I'm not a weed smoker. I don't want to be in that corner. But I do, and I think it's even come at me more in this last like 6 months, because I mean you've been with me on this journey a lot, where I feel like sometimes I still have not found my voice until I kind of am in this space I'm at right now. And right now I feel probably more than ever that I need to keep going back, and not so much stay back there, but look, be like, yo, man, give them an extra pep talk of, look, bro, you don't understand what we going through right now. I get it. You got 8,000 in your pocket right now, but that could be gone tomorrow. And if you got just money in your pocket, what are you doing you got kids? You know, so where are they gonna be with that little 8,000 in your pocket in 6 months? And I like I said, one of the biggest things to me that I think that, you know, and I mentioned this on the pod, is there should be a certain level of teaching that's going on here. You know what I'm saying? And because if we're just throwing money again, like we talked about in the beginning, we got to show people how to act and what's going on right now and how we get out of this. Because I think, you know, it starts too, and this is the part that gets me most, is we just ain't valued. Black people just are not valued. Like they will, like, and I think the one thing I say is all the time, they love our rhythm, but they don't want to mess with the blues. You know what I'm saying?
No, absolutely not.
We just ain't valued. And how do we, with all the things that we've done, all the things that we watch them emulate,
right?
You know, and I ain't saying that we've done everything that's out here. That's great in the world.
I mean, when you look at, I'm just being honest. When you look at inventions, I'm constantly floored every time I learn more history about our people and what we've invented and the things that we've created. It is mind-blowing, right? You can almost account for most things that were created in some way are tied to Black Americans. It's just insane. And I think we have to get to a point where, you know, and I've said this, you know, to people, right? Like, you cannot be the benefactor of my Black brilliance and not respect my people, not honor my talents, like, for me. But not everyone is there, right? You know, there's a meme, you know, that has been circulating, like, some of y'all are who Harriet Tubman would have left behind. Like, everybody's not there. You know, everybody's not there. And even in the corporate space, when I talk about D&I roles kind of being a martyr, and even before I got into D&I and I was doing HR, you know how many people would, you know, just, you know, it was hard, because it's like, I want to help, but everyone is just not the same, you know, they're not made up of the same kind of makeup, DNA, right? And so I have personally, like you, I have a lot of empathy for that. I think you and I both have a lot of empathy for what it's like to grow up differently, which is why, you know, we work so hard with I Care About Me and really wanting to instill in underprivileged areas and for kids that didn't necessarily have that type of reputation, you know, representation for them. But again, you know, when you talk about the conversation of like, is it their responsibility? I say yes and no, right? Like, I don't give a lot of credence to people who are not helping the movement. But at the same time, you know, there are a lot of folks that are silent, and I'm like, right? So we have the ability as consumers to control our dollars, as followers to control who we follow that relates to dollars. So that's everybody. Like, everybody can get it at this point for me, right? Like, and that's not to say that I feel like, you know, everything that people are doing is not like, the revolution ain't got to be televised, right? So everything that people are doing, like, you could look at my Instagram and I'm busy doing the work. So I don't always have time to be like, y'all, I'm doing the work, right? So I'm not talking about a play-by-play or how much you wrote, but it's about your character. What are you displaying, right? Those things, like, it's important for us to be in relationship with our dollars, our money, our followership with people who are moving the movement forward.
Right. Okay. Couple of more points before I let you get out of here. And also, too, can you promise me now that you'll come back? Like, I know your schedule will be crazy, but if you can come back like once a quarter, because I think that we need to keep having, especially from a corporate side, I would like for you to just be that no other term right now because I don't have the cool term for it right now, but friend
Mhm.
of the show that can
Yes,
because I
friend of
think
the
that
show.
yeah, because I think that space I just want to keep diving into this even because
Yeah.
it's funny that once I finally really stepped away from radio and determined that I didn't
Yeah.
exactly need it every day. Not that I don't like it still, but it was more so now like I want to do it on my terms. Like I don't really care about the microphone as much. I care more about what are we making happen and the business of it all, which I
Yeah.
have for the longest time, but now it matters even more. So with that being said, I want to make sure that you come back, and I think Brittany need to be here for some of the things you say too, because Brittany could definitely hear some of the things you say because she's a female, she's brown, yeah. And well,
Yeah.
that's another conversation. But before I let you get out of here, there's a couple more points I want to touch on. One, which I know this is super important to you, your family. You are raising
A
a
black
son,
son.
right? A
Hmm.
black son. What are the talks that are you? And how old is he? How old is he now?
He's small, right? So
Right.
he's 4. He'll be
Okay.
5 here soon. Um, and right now, at this small of an age, there are gentle conversations, right, around race, about being brown, about being proud. There's more affirmational exercises around liking yourself and loving yourself and history, right?
Right.
We don't too much get into like the traumas of being a black boy. So for me, and this is a personal choice, everybody is different. I still want to protect some of his black boy joy, right? I want him to still have a childhood and some innocence. So I don't put a lot on him, and I kind of shield him a little bit from the world while I have that control. I think I probably have another year or two before that will go out of the door, because technically, my son is not in elementary school yet, right? And so when he
Right.
gets into that, there are things I won't be able to control, and conversations will have to evolve. But for me, my sole goal is to raise a good global citizen, right?
Right.
He has
Okay.
he has to be someone's partner one day. He has to be a good human to the earth. He has to be a good human to people. So I'm focused on what are the skills that he needs to add value to this world, so that he
Right.
leaves it better than what he found it. And that is the core focus for me as a mom.
Right. See, you all rounded. That's why I love you, Tony. That's why I love you. And let's finish with this point right here because this is kind of where our conversation has been here, and that's why I just want you to keep coming back because I want to revisit this when we're talking Black Lives Matter, and Brittany and I were having this conversation as well. I don't quite know. And again, I feel and like I said, I told people too. I tell them on my Twitter. I tell them on all my platforms. Hold me accountable because I feel like I'm learning like you said, I'm evolving in this conversation as well. So, and I want to do my part with my platform, with where I'm trying to go, and that sort of thing, right? But and maybe you know a little bit more than I do. Do you know what we're ultimately asking for with Black Lives Matter? Have we established that, or are we going
Yeah.
towards that, or is it multiple things, or what should we be asking for?
Listen,
And it's an evolving question. I know. I know we may not
listen,
have
I,
the
I
answer
think
now.
the challenge is that there are some amazing voices in the movement, right? The Black Lives Matter movement founders, who are absolutely amazing. Which obviously 45, the occupant, came for overnight. I don't know if you saw that in the news, where he was, calling Black Lives Matter movement kind of like a, he all kind of, I won't even repeat, but half the things that he says is, it's dangerous,
Right.
for everyone,
And divisive.
and divisive. But there are, I think the challenge is, it's so noisy now. So many people can make noise that we don't realize like who some of the leaders are. A lot of people say like, oh, back in the day, there was sort of this communal effect, and you had like Martin Luther King and you had Malcolm X, and there were lanes, and it was, really more demographically where you were located, whether you were West Coast or whether you were East Coast or whether you were South, right, and or North, right. And so when you kind of look at how leaders are, there are some amazing voices, I think, in the movement now, right. You have everyone, Brittany Packnett. You have Rachel Cargile. You have Tahishi Coates. You have Angela Rye. There are a lot of people that I try to stay connected to what they're saying, what they're doing, and there's probably a ton more names. I have a whole laundry list of people that I follow,
Right.
but I think that they're we need to pay closer attention to the leaders and the voices within the movement, because I think that it gets noisy.
Right.
And if you really want to focus in on like, what should I personally be doing in my activism, I would say follow some of those voices. But on top of that, I would say, how are you managing your own household, right? Like, how are you spending your dollars? Like, everybody wants to drive an exotic fly car, but go on and pull those corporate social, responsibility reports, those annual reports. See who's inside those organizations, right? You have some outstanding companies. Like, listen, Ben and Jerry's was like, we've been told y'all this. We
Right.
like, Ben and Jerry's is like, we've been doing this work before it was cool to do this work. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
We've been dismantling the system one scoop at a time with ice cream, right? So there's some companies that deserve to be elevated because they've been in the marathon with us way before everybody started sprinting, right?
Right.
So I think that's important, where you spend your dollars. So for me and my husband have gotten very clear about like the type of cars we drive, who we build with, where we invest our money. We put a percentage of our wealth into a black bank. We selected a black bank. And you saw a couple of major corporations coming out saying that they're going to take a percentage of their assets and put it into black banks,
Black
right?
banks, right. I saw that.
So there are so many things that, I think before you can even become like a true external activist, the very first thing that you can do is become an activist in your home, right?
Okay.
Like, start with, what can you do in your neighborhood HOA? Like, do you need to be sitting on that board? Do you need to be on somebody's city council? Do you need to be, there's a really great thing happening for me that'll come out on Monday, and it's about the city of Dallas and some of the things that I'll be doing. I can't say it right now because I don't know when this is going to come out. But, but what I'll say is that I, even as somebody who's doing this work, have had to challenge myself about what I could be doing more. So I live in a suburb of Dallas, and I was like, listen, my little city mayor in my little suburb need to know my name. So I was harassing him on email like, sir, are you going to start a task force? Can I be on that task force? How can I provide my insight? Here's my bio. He was like, ma'am, if you send me one more email. But the thing is that even I, doing this work, realize there's more that I can be doing. There's more
Right.
that I can be influencing. So I think our first step, if we're really going to elevate the movement, is to do the work independently for ourselves.
Right. Dude. But like you said too, I think that starting with the person in the mirror, as crazy as simple as it sounds, starting with that person. And then also too, like another point you made earlier, it's not always, you don't always have to be like, I did it. Just get it done. Like,
just get it done. Yeah.
Just get it done. And every time I think I'm gonna let you out of here, something else come up because I want your insight. Like, and I don't want this to overrun because I want you to make sure that you want to come back. But while we were speaking about people to follow, right? I've been thinking about this for a few days because it was somebody that I really valued his opinion when I would see him on CNN. And then all of a sudden this story breaks the other day, and I'm talking about Van Jones. And you seem pretty up on things. You know who Van Jones is.
Yes, I'm very familiar, yeah.
Right. And this story comes out. CNN's Van Jones reportedly helped craft Trump police reform order in secret. I guess what that means is he's been.
Yeah, he's had a very, so for one, let's just say this. He's had a complicated past. He's been very forthcoming about it.
Okay.
I think a lot of his sentiment has changed over the years.
Right.
And here's the thing. I know if most of you have seen Just Mercy, there's a line in that movie where he said, we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done. So let me say this about Van Jones. I think he's done some amazing work as it relates to our criminal justice system and reform. I think he continues to do good work. But listen, he has a past that is a little complicated. And right. I think it's up to you individually on, whether or not you believe that. I'm not the judge and the juror of like who, everyone, but we are all better than what, and I'll say this in fairness, right? Because I told you I started my career in HR. 17 years ago, I can remember hiring people and say, for example, a black male comes in, he fails the background, right? And he lied on his application. And I used to remember feeling embarrassed and being like, why would he lie? And blah, blah, blah. But over the years of doing this work, right? And understanding criminal justice reform, understanding the flawed system of criminal justice, understanding how you might have a white male in corporate who can be hired to do a job with a criminal past, but because of the kind of crime he committed, he can have the job. He can even have the job and smoke meth every week, and we'll put him through an FMLA program because we call his drug habit a disease, right?
Wow.
But because you sold drugs to eat, you're disqualified from this role forever, even when you're trying to feed your kids and turn your life around. So even who I started out as a practitioner has evolved. So I want to say that we have to give a little bit of grace that people are better than the worst decision they ever made, and they're entitled to journey and to have a different perspective, right? Now, I haven't seen the new Van Jones, and I don't know how recent that was or wasn't, but I know that he has a complicated past, but I also know that he's done some great work too. So it's kind of, six in one hand, a half a dozen in the other.
Right. And I think the biggest thing about this Van Jones thing too is, like you said, and I will say this over and over, I'm not a fan of cancel culture. We all have made mistakes. To me, I'm a fan of change behavior, and sometimes you got to be in some ugly fights in order to get some real work done, right? I think the biggest part of this thing, without reading it, because I have this particular article was in the New York Post, and it came out on the 29th, and so I had explored it a lot when it was on Twitter. You know what I'm saying? A lot of it was coming down Twitter, and it was like, yeah, I told you Van Jones was this, and DL had some choice words that he had said about him before. I think the biggest part of this thing is when it says help craft Trump police. So anytime your name is anywhere associated around Donald Trump and you are black, immediately it's like, nah, bro, he ain't for us at all. He ain't for us at all. So in all fairness, to end on that point, I think that what you said was, can I get the Just Mercy quote again? And I saw the movie too. I just saw the movie too, like a week and a half ago. What's the quote so we can I want to leave them with that.
Yeah, we're all better than the worst thing we've ever done.
I think that is when people are trying, and that's one of the things we talk about in I Care About Me Too, is you can't go back and change the mistakes that you've made, but from here you can move forward, and we just got a lot of work to do. I'm just glad that my work is side by side with you, and that you came and now you have agreed to be
a friend of the show.
You are our first friend of the show, Toni. Like I have never even said that to anybody before. Like I have never. That is.
I am honored. I listen. I listen to the episodes. I think they're hilarious. And I'm happy to be a friend of the show. And I just love you, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate the voice that you give in this space. Like I think you're amazing. I thought you was amazing before you knew you was amazing. So hey.
I'm just trying to, and I think, like you said, it's a lot of work to do, and I don't understand all the work yet. But what I am doing, and it's a fight some days. But I think one of the best pieces of advice that you gave too is get up in the morning and do what you can. You know what I'm saying? The world it's way too much that has happened in the world for us to think that it's going to get changed in 6 days, 6 months, maybe even a year. But we got to start going in this direction, then we can help make some change. So that part I appreciate it. Where can they find you at online? Because you got quite a few things going online.
Everything, right? So, but the easiest way to find me online is at The Corporate T on all social media handles. It's super easy. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can find me at The Corporate T, TEA.
And you're doing some other things too. You do like seminars and stuff too.
Man. Like, so you can thecorporatet.com. Obviously, you can find me online, right? I have my annual conference that I do for women. Obviously, COVID is throwing a monkey wrench in everyone, but it's called Power Moves, and it focuses on career advice and development for women of color. I have my consulting arm for my company, so I do a lot of partnership with small and medium-sized companies on how they can really develop their internal infrastructure and D&I lens as well. So I'm just me, I'm always moving and shaking, and I'm just trying to lead the world better than I found it.
I like it. And I appreciate you, and you will come back soon. And of course, like you said, find her at The Corporate T. And it's like, I love how you move around social too in the digital space, because there's always like, I may be scrolling all fast and being I try not to look at as many twerk videos anymore, Toni, but then
Thank God you've been delivered.
I'll see something dope that you post, and it'd be advice for everybody. But I do love very much how you champion Black Girl Magic. I think that is a very dope space to be in as well. All right, we gonna get this world in a better place. We are, I promise. For everybody.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate
so
you.
Fun.
No, I'm glad you're here, and I'm like I said, I can't wait for Brittany to come back and meet you. And she did call me before. She was like, Ekin, I'm gonna have to miss today, so she did want to say hello and that she can't wait to meet you. And again, I think I love about having Brittany here too is there's some things that I might miss in my conversation with you, right? That she'll
Yeah.
just be like, and I'll be like, well, I didn't even think of that, and just from her psyche of thinking, well, and we're both, even though when it's entertainment thing, it's great. I think to have someone like you on because even in this entertainment space, a lot of people don't understand. We're dealing with corporate. We deal with when we're in
Yeah.
these spaces. We deal with HR. We deal with, like I said, in these genres of music and entertainment. It's all kind of intertwined. So the
Yeah.
diversity's there, the wanting to be included. We all go through that, man. So again, I appreciate you being here. On my little DJ Ekin podcast, and we moving
Yeah.
in a good direction.
Yay!
Uh,
Yeah.
for everybody that rocks with us, of course, you can find me at DJ Ekin across all the socials, and it's at Brunch with Brittany, of course, for her. And again, Toni Howard Lowe at the Corporate T on all of her socials, and your site is up too, right? TheCorporateT.com.
Yeah, and thecorporatee.com, they can find me.
She be ready on digital, boy. I tell you. Rock with us, man. Shouts out to Radio Influence, as always, having our back, man. And again, for the entire family, the DJ Ekin podcast. We gone. Thank you.